The Center for Development and Enterprise, this report. Take a look at the working age population as far as jobs are concerned. So how many working age people are in jobs percentage-wise in other developing countries on a global average compared to South Africa? Look at the gap, as the report suggests. 61% of working age people, global average, in jobs, as opposed to South Africa's 42%. Let's move on, give you another figure, the number of unemployed in SA, and look at the gradual growth as the report tells us. 2009, 7.1 million people out of work, moves on to 2014, 8.4 million, and then of course that crisis number that we've seen, 10.3 million people out of work in 2022, when you consider the expanded definition of unemployment, which really is the most important definition to look at. And then this is an interesting fact from the report. Daily labour market entrance, 1,700 people entering the job market daily. Of that, only 500 find work. So when you take a look at these two numbers, there's a huge gap, and I guess it kind of spells out what the real situation is like. So while you're looking at that graphic, those are the key facts. We'll chat in a moment to Chief Executive at the Center for Enterprise, or Center for Development and Enterprise, Anne Bernstein. I'm just going to walk over there very quickly to chat to Anne. And we took a look at those facts. I mean, of course, it really is about approach, as the report suggests. What have we been getting wrong here?
Well, for the last 2 decades, South Africa's had presidential summits, job summits, NEDLAC negotiations, NGO projects, business projects, initiatives, and all of this has not helped. And what we've done is we've avoided the key issues. And the key issues relate to this very slow growth the country has and our refusal to implement the reforms that are needed to drive faster growth. But even if we got growth, we've refused to look at the labour market. And South Africa gets fewer jobs when we get growth than we should do. And that's because the laws make it harder and harder and more expensive for people to employ, especially unskilled workers. So we're avoiding the real issues. We're saying we're doing things, we're pretending we're doing things, but unless we grasp the hard nettle of these difficult reforms, and they will be politically challenging, we will not make progress, and the unemployment rate will go up. And the 10.3 million people who are unemployed will only increase.
You've said this time and time again that what's missing in many of these policy approaches is the fact that you have so many unskilled workers in South Africa that don't seem to be absorbed in an economy that's not accommodating for them. What do you mean by that?
Our current industrial policy favours capital sort of subsidies. We encourage firms that use machines and technology, and we give them subsidies to do that. The biggest example is, of course, the automobile industry. It's the most capital-intensive industry in the world, and robots are kind of coming there, or there are already a lot, and there will be more. But we subsidize them, and we don't provide similar kinds of encouragement and incentives for labor-intensive firms. Across the developing world, countries that have moved millions of people out of poverty have encouraged labour-intensive manufacturing, factories that are making cheap shirts, cheap T-shirts, and things like that as a first step, not the last step, the first step to getting people into employment. And what's so clear, and the Expanded Public Works Programme demonstrates this, is that people would rather work for a low wage than no wage at all. So one of the key things we're saying is the definition of worker in South Africa has to include the unemployed. And that will start to lead us in a different direction altogether. But at the moment, everything that's being done is having no impact. The situation is worsening because we're avoiding the real challenges.
I want to pick up, and this is my last point, on what the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, has said. So we know the debacle over his remarks on speeding up these reforms that we talk about. But he does say that there's going to have to be some serious talks with unions, and I suppose it revolves around those issues of what do we pay attention to, the workers that are there or the people that are unemployed, and the issue of minimum wages. And how do you see us navigating through that terrain?
So the proposals in our report have based on a lot of thought on how to calibrate a situation where you don't want to undermine the benefits and the wages of existing workers who themselves have recently come out of poverty, but at the same time you want an economy where firms can adapt to technological change and much more competition and open the doors to unskilled people. So we have made carefully thought through proposals for reform of the labour market, which I think answer that. Now, unfortunately, the Minister of Finance's document last year included reform to the labour market, but now this has been pushed back to NEDLAC. And unless we're going to see a determined effort to think through a reform strategy by the President and the Cabinet, we're not going to make progress. We can't let the unions continue to veto any change. And successful reformers have to think about the reforms that they want. They have to communicate why we need those reforms so desperately. They need to build allies, because workers go a lot further than only unionized workers. And they have to start talking. We've got to change the terms of the debate in the country. So it's not artificial numbers of how many jobs we're going to get, which we never do. We fail to get them. And not sort of emphasizing projects. We have to acknowledge we've got to change the environment and make these difficult reforms. Otherwise we won't get faster growth and we won't get much more labour-intensive growth, and the unemployment numbers will go up and up and up.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it there. Anne Bernstein from the Centre of Development and Enterprise. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Not the greatest of pitches there, Tulis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Devan, for that. I guess it echoes that whole cry about the need for reforms in our economy, right? And it comes at a critical time ahead of the State of the Nation address as well as the budget 2020. Devan Murugan and Bernstein, thank you so much.